Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We have a lot to do in today's show. So Georgia gets a big commitment yesterday, flipping a player away from those lousy, stinking Gators. You know we're all over that. Brock Bowers had some interesting things to say this week about his return from injury. We'll address that before the show is done today. There's a big question I think needs to be asked as it relates to this weekend, whether or not college football can avoid something again that it has seemingly avoided all year long. We'll do that. But off the top, big talk coming out of Knoxville. The idea they're going to try to create a big atmosphere for Saturday in the hopes of pulling an upset. We'll talk about what Tennessee is saying about that and what Georgia plans on doing to prevent that from happening. We'll cover all of that ground here over the course of the next couple of minutes. We're really glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So it's a great time to be a Georgia fan. You already know that. And weekends like this, one of the reasons why that's true, because Georgia has a chance here over the course of these few days, starting yesterday, moving into Saturday, to strike a pretty big blow to two different rivals. And that's always kind of a nice thing to do. It was recruiting yesterday. We'll get there in a moment. It's obviously on the field on Saturday with Tennessee. Let's do that here right now. And what Georgia's plans are to prevent this big atmosphere and this upset opportunity and all of that kind of stuff. Georgia's obviously got a plan to stop that, and we're going to address that here coming up in the next couple of minutes. Beginning with this, Tennessee coach Josh Heupel, boy, he's got some big talk out there right now. He believes this can be a big day for his program on Saturday, a lot like what last year was when Tennessee came to Georgia. This is what Josh Heupel said this week. There's what you call a teleconference every Wednesday. It's all the SEC coaches. They pop on there via the telephone, and the media types are all there, and so it's every coach every week. Heupel was on there yesterday, and Heupel was really hyping up, no pun intended, what he thought the atmosphere could be like in Neyland Stadium on Saturday. Let's begin with that here right now. I'm going to read this to you. Heupel saying, I expect it to be as an electric of an atmosphere as we've ever had there, which is as good as there is in college football, he says about Neyland Stadium. Crowd noise can have a factor in the football game if you don't do things to control the controllables and operate and communicate effectively during the course of the game. Josh Heupel goes on to say, some of that happened to us last year. We need to make it extremely difficult for them to communicate. That needs to be a part of the football game. I certainly expect to see our crowd ready for this one when we kick off. Now, there are a couple of reasons why I sort of share that quote with you. First of all, I do believe, and I have tried to say this here this week without kind of overdoing it, I have tried to suggest this week that the notion that Tennessee is just going to lay down and die because their season is seemingly over, they were embarrassed last week at Missouri, that I do think the Tennessee players, the Tennessee coaches, and even the Tennessee fans see this as sort of like one more, like, do you like golf? If you like golf, it used to be that the PGA Championship, the fourth major, was the last major. And I actually sort of missed this being in August a little bit. But it used to be the PGA Championship was the final major, and it was in August. Now it's in May. And so the final major is now the British Open. But it used to be that the PGA Championship was in May. And many of you who follow PGA Tour and professional golf, you know that the nickname the PGA Championship had when it was August was, this was glory's last shot. And honestly, the PGA Championship has sort of always had a little bit of a difficult time, for those of you who care about golf, establishing its own identity in comparison to the Masters and the British Open and the U.S. Open, which have very easily well-defined identities. PGA Championship has never quite had as much of that. So the notion that it was glory's last shot, your last chance to win a major championship in a given year, that was a certain level of branding that the PGA Championship probably doesn't have anymore now that it's moved forward. Anyway, that's a different sport and obviously not the purpose of our conversation here. But the whole idea of glory's last shot, I do think that's what Tennessee is sort of selling it on here this week. Okay, we can't win the East. Got 3 losses already. There's not a whole lot going on around here, but Last year we beat Alabama. We also beat Florida last year. Now we get this rivalry game against Georgia. Remember, Cooper Mays talked about that earlier this week. This is sort of Glory's last shot. This is our last chance to have something to show for the year that is 2023. That is what Tennessee, I believe, is sort of selling this game on being here on Saturday. Now, most Georgia fans kind of roll their eye at the notion of, well, last year Georgia's crowd got all over us, and Heupel's seeming insinuation that, well, if it's not for that, then maybe we win that game, if not for that Georgia crowd. And so now we're going to return the favor here this year as if Georgia and Tennessee are a program that are equals here at the moment. Obviously, that's not true. So you can kind of laugh and roll your eyes at that. Heupel probably trying to push something that's not quite completely accurate there on all of that. But I would say directionally, Heupel is accurate in that Tennessee fans, the ones that have tickets, the ones that are coming to Knoxville on Saturday, they probably, like a lot of fans do, have the ability to talk themselves into this being sort of a Glory's last shot type moment. And we're going to play for one Saturday as if we are still a good team, and as if our team does have something to accomplish this year. We're going to try to upend a long winning streak for Georgia and get this rivalry win that has, for the most part, eluded us here during the Kirby Smart era. We're going to try to do that here on Saturday. I believe that's probably true. So the question then becomes, okay, well, what does Georgia plan on doing to prevent that? Because obviously for Georgia on Saturday, while it does have the SEC East sewn up, it knows that it's playing Alabama coming up in the SEC championship. The mission to go for 3 in 23 will eventually be the most prominent discussion we have around here. But taking care of business week to week is also a step towards eventually getting to that end-of-season goal. If Josh Heupel, believes his crowd's going to be loud and also thinks that crowd can be impactful and kind of slowing down what Georgia wants to do, the question then becomes, okay, well, what does Georgia plan on doing to thrive in a hostile environment? Probably the most hostile environment it'll face all season. What does Georgia plan on doing to succeed when everything in a building filled with 110,000 people, at least the majority of the folks in that building, will be trying to put all the energy they can towards keeping you from being successful? What's Georgia's plan with all of that? Well, earlier this week, Georgia coach Kirby Smart talked about the success, the key to winning on the road, and luckily it is something that Georgia seems to be kind of doing pretty well at right now. This is Kirby Smart on that going back earlier this week.
You got to find ways to run the ball. You can't sit there and think you're going to be able to just throw it every down and win a game. You got to win the line of scrimmage. The keys to winning on the road are the same as keys to winning at home. It's just more difficult. I mean, it doesn't change. The game doesn't change. You got to be able to take a punch. You got to be able to take momentum changes. But the people in the stands aren't playing in the game. So the outside elements of all the undisciplined penalties and all those things, we try really hard to avoid those when we go on the road because they're self-inflicted wounds sometimes. But that's the challenge. The challenge is win the line of scrimmage, win the turnover battle, win the explosive battle, and you do that by blocking and tackling people.
Doesn't that just feel like really, really true? Like Smart mentions a lot of things there, but the thing that Smart mentions first, like, isn't that just the most true of all? This crowd is loud. They want to believe that anything is possible. They want to believe that their team is actually better than the 3 losses they've seen them suffer through thus far this season. Hope wants to spring eternal at opening kickoff. Like, how do you take the air out of the balloon from the word go? Smart says, run the ball. In other words, you can kind of dream up any scenario in football, but the thing that sort of brings you back to reality and kind of brings you crashing back down to earth very, very fast is when you realize the other team is just more physically imposing than you are, because there is no game plan around that. Being bigger, being stronger, and having the will to use that strength to your advantage, that's the kind of thing that upends any upset before it even has a chance to get started. And that's what Kirby Smart says they're going to try to do on Saturday. Going to try to run the ball, going to try to utilize what they believe can be an advantage on the line of scrimmage. And here's the thing. If we're being honest here for a moment, go back to early September, October. Georgia's ability to run it whenever it wanted to. Were we sure we were going to see that on a week-in, week-out basis? Perhaps we weren't. Was the Georgia offensive line truly dominating there at that particular point? At times, perhaps, that it wasn't. Georgia certainly wasn't kind of piling up the rushing yards in a way that we were used to seeing it do. But now, late November, when Kirby Smart says, yeah, we're going to run the ball on the road, and that's going to be our recipe for taking this crowd out of the game, all of a sudden that's a lot more believable after what you saw on Saturday against Ole Miss, and probably an underrated defense. Now, how good is Ole Miss really? I guess I don't know. After a 52-17 beatdown, you might say maybe not a great team. But the one thing that the Rebels had been sneaky good at all year long was actually kind of a sneaky good defense. But the Georgia rushing attack had a lot of success on Saturday. And for a Georgia passing attack that's been a big part of the story all year long, adding that rushing attack component to this, obviously for Georgia, that was a big revelation. And the cool part about that for UGA fans is it was sort of that breakout moment for a name that Georgia fans have had circled all year long for a guy that could do big things for Georgia. That's running back Kendall Milton. You can make all the deal you want to about Ladd McConkey coming back from a back injury and the heroic way in which Brock Bowers came back from an ankle injury. More on him before our show is done today. But don't discount the return of Kendall Milton, who's been playing here a little bit, but never better than he was on Saturday night. So when Kirby Smart says, we're going to go on the road, we're going to run the ball, we're going to dominate the line of scrimmage, and that's going to take the Tennessee crowd out of the game, based on what Milton did on Saturday, the idea of that being true becomes a whole lot more believable. In fact, let's go back to Saturday's post-game press conference when Milton did have the big breakout game. Kirby talked then about how valuable he could be. This is what Kirby Smart said going back to Saturday night.
Well, Kendall ran really hard tonight. I thought that was like the toughest and hardest I've seen him run. You know, he ran through tackles. He ran through people's face. I mean, he ran like he was mad. And he approached the whole week that way. He's really stepped up and become a more vocal leader. I think a lot of the credit goes to Kendall and Dejon, but a lot of the credit goes to that offensive line too, because we felt like we had the ability to keep fresh. We had 3 tackles rolling and we had 3 guards rolling. And to me, that was special. And I'm not taking anything away from Kendall, because Kendall was the best Kendall tonight, the way he ran.
Would you like to see more of a Kendall Milton running mad on Saturday against Tennessee? I believe that you will. And would you like to see that paired, as Kirby Smart said, with Dejon Edwards? Of course you want that too. And are you happy with the way this Georgia offensive line is playing right now? Yes, you are indeed. All of that's really true from Kirby Smart. Now, let me finish this topic by saying this. Obviously, one of the things that I've sort of pushed this week, and I've tried not to push it too hard, I've just tried to suggest it lightly and gently, is that I do think that Saturday can still be a dangerous game for Georgia, despite the fact that it's undefeated and it's got many more wins still to come, and the fact that Tennessee is frankly not playing nearly as well right now. College football has a way of sort of surprising us from time to time, and I've tried to suggest that it could be that Georgia's got one more close game still to play here before it gets to the mission of go for 3 in 23. Still expect Georgia to win, of course, but maybe getting challenged on the road wouldn't be incredibly shocking if we saw that. That's what I've said here this week. However, I want to kind of conclude by saying, while I have pushed that as an idea, it's important to note, especially in light of Josh Heupel saying what he said, Georgia seemingly clearly focused on being as intense and physical as it can possibly be to counteract whatever Tennessee throws at it in the road environment. The whole notion that, it could be dangerous for Georgia, that it could be a tricky spot for Georgia. While I have pushed that, it's kind of a hunch or sort of a belief that I have. The truth is the actual numbers, and I always try to lean on the numbers when I possibly can, the actual numbers here don't necessarily back that up. So for those of you who've been like yelling at your phone or yelling at your laptop when you've heard me say this week, be careful about Georgia, as a 10-point favorite here. Maybe this game's a little closer than that. Let me give you some evidence to back up your point against me and sort of suggest why my point, maybe it's a hunch, maybe it's just sort of a sneaking suspicion, but not necessarily backed up empirically. When you look at Georgia in its last 5 SEC road games played November or later, what you see is that Georgia's 4-1 against the spread in those last 5 games. The only instance in which they didn't cover the spread was last year's Kentucky game, very cold, kind of a bad weather type deal. But last trip here to Neyland in 2021, easy cover for Georgia. The game played against Mississippi State last year, a cover for UGA. A little bit close in the first half, but Georgia pulled away there in the second half. By the way, Georgia had nothing to play for when it played Neyland in 2021, yet, as I said before, still won easily. Go back to 2020, late season games there in November. Once again, it's South Carolina, it's Missouri. Georgia had already known it wasn't going to win the SEC East, but still won those games easily. Georgia, for the most part, has been pretty good in the month of November, using the spread as kind of a judge there on that. They've had no problem covering the spread in SEC road games over the course of the last 2 or 3 years here. On the other side of that for Tennessee, For all that Josh Heupel wants to say about, nobody's got a better home field advantage than us. Nobody creates an environment that's more difficult for teams to come and play than our Tennessee fans do. Needling loud, they like to call it. The truth is the numbers don't back that up necessarily very well. Go back and look at the last 7 instances under Josh Heupel in which Tennessee's been a home underdog. In other words, not expected to win the game, playing better than expectations. You almost never see it. The one counterexample here is the Alabama game last year, obviously, when Tennessee won as a 9-point underdog. But other than that, Tennessee just 1-6 straight up as an underdog at home under Josh Heupel, and just 2-5 against the spread as a home underdog there as well. So this notion that Tennessee plays far better than expectation when playing at home with a favorable crowd, numbers don't necessarily back that up, not when an underdog anyway. So, I'm going to stick with my hunch. I still think there's a chance this game is a little closer than experts think it's going to be. I obviously expect it to be a Georgia win, but perhaps a little bit more of a hard-fought win than some Georgia fans are kind of anticipating it to be. But even as I say that, I wanted to make sure I at least gave you the fair and balanced numerical side of this, which suggests that Tennessee actually hasn't been quite as good at home when facing stiff competition as Josh Heupel thinks that it has. And Georgia, in games in which it kind of has nothing to play for, sort of like it does on Saturday, that doesn't stop Georgia in the past from being incredibly motivated. Does the same thing sort of show up again here this weekend? There's obviously a very good chance that's true. Either way, the recipe for a Georgia victory is exactly as Smart described it to be. Going on the road, run the ball, establish the physical dominance, open up opportunities for Carson Beck in this passing game to get some big plays, take this Tennessee crowd out of it, and Neyland Stadium in Knoxville can be painted red and black come Saturday night. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather & Tharp, and we are happy to have you with us. No matter how you get to us, live on video, 9:45, that's our 1st and 15 on the DawgNation homepage and DawgNation app. So happy to have that audience joining us each and every morning. A lot of fun that is. Of course, across all video platforms after that at 10 a.m., the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 Rev, podcasts wherever you find them, every podcast platform. We're just happy to make the show available and happy that you have found it. We really, really appreciate you being a part of all of that with us. Also, a big thanks to our friends at Merriweather & Tharp making today's show possible there as well. Your source for Georgia divorce. And boy, I mean Georgia when I say Georgia because, as you know, our friends at Merriweather & Tharp have a brand new website we've been rolling out for you here over the course of the last few weeks. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com, because our friends at Merriweather & Tharp now extending their services beyond just the Atlanta area. They've got offices opening up very soon in Savannah and in Athens, really stretching across the state here because they believe the service they can provide for you should be for as many people in the state of Georgia as can possibly get it. And I love that because here's the thing you've heard me say many times before. That divorce is obviously scary and confusing, and we don't sugarcoat that, right? We know how harrowing of an experience that can be for those who may see themselves going through that or those who anticipate that they might be going through that. But that's why I recommend Merriweather & Tharp. Not because divorce is great. Divorce may not feel very great for you here right now, but quality service, intimate care, that can be great. You can have great service in the midst of a challenging situation, and that's what I believe that Merriweather & Tharp is able to provide. Because I think one of the things that Merriweather & Tharp does is it has a lot of knowledge about how it feels to be in this. And one of the strongest feelings you may feel right now is what all this means for you financially, including the cost of the divorce process itself. And that's where Merriweather & Tharp has sort of set up a range of options for you depending on whatever your financial expectation might be for this. Merriweather & Tharp's got an option to help you get through this, whether it's more like a DIY type thing that can be done for as low as $99. Perhaps it's the M&T assisted model that makes more sense for you, kind of a step up from do-it-yourself. That's starting at $1,749. I think one of the things that's perhaps the most popular right now is what they call their model M&T level of service, which offers you a couple of different ways to pay for this. Perhaps it's sort of a subscription thing that you do on a monthly basis until your divorce is completed, or perhaps you just want to pay kind of a flat fee. Once again, you have an idea, some cost certainty about exactly what divorce is going to mean for you. Now, if you want the traditional coverage, they can also offer that for you there as well. But trying to kind of be more creative about the process of providing cost certainty for you as you go through this divorce process here right now. So please check them out online. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. That's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Merriweather & Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. We've got Terence Edwards coming up on a Thursday, as we always do. That's going to be a really fun conversation. But let me say this there as well. So if you are watching live, I want you to stick with me to the end of the show. I know yesterday we had a little bit of an issue with our RS Andrews cooldown, and I apologize for that. But today, as kind of a makeup on that, we're going to do something really, really fun. So as you know, the DawgNation invasion takes place on Saturday on the Tennessee River. So many of you looking forward to being there with us for that. I certainly appreciate RS Andrews and Kroger and the Dog Cave for making all that possible. But it's our friends at RS Andrews in particular I want to kind of give a shout out to for a moment, because some of y'all heard me earlier this week talk about our waiting list and the chance to get on there, and so we kind of hyped that up a little bit. I was told to stop doing that. We have no more room in the waiting list, cannot do any more of that. But there are still so many of you that would love that kind of last-minute chance to be on our DawgNation invasion on Saturday. So here's what I'm going to tell you to do. Stick with us for the RS Andrews cooldown at the end of the show. And if you're a podcast listener normally and you want your chance in on this, go to a video platform, Facebook or YouTube or DawgNation.com, something like that, and go to the end of the show for our RS Andrews cooldown. If you're hearing this kind of after the live broadcast, we are going to offer a chance for a couple of folks to win their way onto the DawgNation invasion of the Tennessee River at no charge. So that's going to be a really fun thing, courtesy of our friends at RS Andrews. We'll tell you more details about that here coming up in just a moment. We'll give you everything you need to know about that. So stick with us for the end of the show there on that for your chance on that. All right, so it's Terence Edwards coming up here in a moment there as well. For now, though, let's get ready to go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Serve Pro. And we're going to be spiteful here for a second because, honestly, that's just the way we are from time to time. You know the scenario with Georgia's biggest rival, the Florida Gators. Lousy, stinking Gators, we call them around here. Obviously, Georgia's getting ready for Tennessee on the field on Saturday, but that doesn't mean that Georgia can't walk and chew gum at the same time. While they are preparing for what hopefully will be a beatdown of the Vols, they are also in the midst of another beatdown when it comes to Florida and recruiting. And there is something sort of extra sweet here about a recruiting win against Florida here right now. Nasir Johnson, the latest to flip away from Florida to UGA. Let's give him a little bit of a shout-out here right now. Very good defensive lineman. Kind of an interesting divide, perhaps, so to speak, from when it comes to the industry on Johnson. He's actually rated as like a top 75 player according to the 24/7 Sports individual ranking. Kind of a top 200-ish overall when you sort of factor in all of the various ranking services. But 24/7 really likes Johnson a lot. A 4-star guy out of Dublin High School here in Georgia, been a Florida defensive line commit, flipping away from UGA. We believe that Georgia's probably not done with its defensive line recruiting before this cycle is done. In fact, it may not be done with former Florida defensive line commits when it comes to all of that there as well. A lot of that coming up with Jeff Sintel there tomorrow. But the sort of quick, easy headline for right now is that Georgia gets the big recruiting win. Nasir Johnson takes the official visit for the game against Ole Miss on Saturday. Fresh off of that, boom, kicks Florida to the curb and on his way to UGA, which we always really, really love. Now, the thing that makes this extra sweet right now is the backdrop around the Florida program. Billy Napier is at Florida for one reason. Billy Napier is here is because he was thought to be the kind of coach that could build out a more robust recruiting apparatus than what Dan Mullen had in place prior to Napier getting here. And the truth is, for the most part, that's kind of working out. They got the big quarterback commit, DJ Lagway. They are near the top of the recruiting rankings on the composite for this year. That for the most part, things have been going really well for Florida in recruiting. They have had a couple of decommits as of late. Nasir Johnson becomes, the third within the last 7 days or so for Florida when it comes to all of that. And all of this sort of brings back to mind the ineptitude that Florida has been dealing with that even created the job opening for Napier in the first place. Going back to the time of Dan Mullen, the whole idea of recruiting, that's not something he enjoyed talking about very much, and he didn't want to talk about it at all during the season. Do you remember back in the 2021 season when Mullen was still employed as the Florida coach and the whole idea of recruiting came up? And he essentially tried to sidestep the entire topic. This is Mullen going back to 2021.
We're in the season right now. We'll do recruiting after the season. When it gets this recruiting time, we can talk about recruiting.
So Florida fans were like, we don't want a coach that doesn't want to talk about recruiting. And if you want to have an idea of just how long sort of that, blemish has lingered in the air, you remember after the Florida game this year when Georgia won and Kirby Smart in the post-game press conference talking about, people predicting Florida to beat Georgia, obviously making the veiled reference to Dan Mullen. To give you an idea, as you see the nice flip there on the video screen, it's an amazing level of athleticism, really, really quite impressive Let's watch this one more time for those of you on video. How about this? Now, my daughter's into gymnastics. I believe she would call that a back tuck there. That's incredible. What an incredible thing to see that is. But the point is, the idea of Mullen not liking to recruit and things like that, that's such a prominent, top-of-mind idea that when Kirby wanted to take the zinger and the jab at Mullen after this year's Florida game because Mullen had picked the Gators to beat UGA, he kind of called back up on this again in that post-game press conference. This is just from a few weeks ago. Many of you remember this, but it's always kind of fun to kind of live through stuff like this again. Kirby Smart making fun of Dan Mullen.
I don't see it or hear it, but I know it's out there. Somebody texted me before the game. It's like all these people predicting that we're not going to, we're not going to win today. And I'm just like, golly, where's that coming from? Supposed to be my friend. He didn't like to recruit though, so that's all I guess.
Kirby taking the jab at Mullen. Oh, he didn't like to recruit though. Mullen himself letting you know back in the 2021 season, hey, we'll talk about recruiting when it gets to be the recruiting time of year. Well, Florida said, we want a coach who views all 12 months as the recruiting time of year. We want a coach who's serious about recruiting. And right now, that's all Billy Napier has because they're not winning nothing, bad grammar intentional. They're not winning nothing on the football field. Recruiting's all they have. And you start to wonder, is that starting to crack here just a little bit? Few decommits. Nasir Johnson didn't take him very long to sort of realize Georgia was the right place for him to be. This is a very good defensive line addition for UGA. So we'll obviously celebrate this, what this means for the Dogs. Obviously, Georgia's got a needed defensive line, given how many current defensive linemen on this team are likely to move on at the end of this year. So this is good news for Georgia, but it's also bad news for the lousy, stinking Gators. And we always have a little bit of time to sort of pause and appreciate just how bad things have been for Florida, dating back to Mullen's time as coach, and the fact that some of that bad vibe still lingers here even during the Billy Napier era. So a really good time and a really, really enjoyable thing. Always good when Georgia wins a recruiting battle for a 4-star defensive lineman, but it's sort of extra sweet when they do so at the expense of those lousy, stinking Gators. And right now, Billy Napier, for all the big talk and all the hope and all the anticipation, the actual results for Florida still aren't much better than they were, if better at all, in the Dan Mullen time. So kind of fun to think about all of that. And we'll make that Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at ServPro. Now, listen, Florida's got a mess, and I don't know if there's any hope in cleaning all of that up. But if you are dealing with your own mess, there is hope for you. So if you have your home or your commercial property or something like that, it's been damaged by fire or it's been kind of wrecked by like water intrusion, something like that, obviously you want all of that sort of put back together like it never even happened. And that's where the restoration specialist from ServPro can be a really important resource for you, because each and every ServPro franchise, independently owned and operated, these are folks who are dedicated to getting out in the field and taking good care of you, getting your mess cleaned up. Rental property, commercial property, your actual personal home, whatever the story is. If it's been damaged, if there's fire, if there's water that's gotten where it's not supposed to be, if you've got some sort of huge mess that needs to be cleaned up, the restoration specialists of ServPro want to do great work for you. So please make sure you reach out to them online. It's servpro.com. That's SERV, servpro.com for a lot more on that. We appreciate ServPro bringing Around the Doghouse to us here today. All right, before we're done, Brock Bowers said some very good things about his return to UGA, and we'll talk more about why that, I think, matters for the Dogs as you sort of move into this kind of final stretch run of the season. But prior to that, big game for Georgia against Tennessee on Saturday, and a lot of fun for the Dogs on offense. Let's talk to a guy who's actually had a lot to say about this in recent days. Let's do all that right now with our good friend Terence Edwards, the great former Georgia wide receiver, on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, we'll bring in Terence Edwards here. We'll talk a little Georgia-Tennessee with him to kind of kick things off here. Terence, the discussion I've been kind of having thus far this week is, tough road environment. Tennessee sort of feels like they're kind of going to make this their like last stand on the season. Georgia's obviously kind of got things sort of salted away here. Maybe at this point in time, it's just sort of looking to get in and get out. We may have lost Terence. Did we lose Terence? Okay, so we lost Terence. We'll see if we can get him back here. But I'll set him up to talk more about this Georgia-Tennessee game. And obviously, if you're watching live right now, don't forget the message that I gave to you a little bit earlier, which is stay with us for our DawgNation, what we call our R.S. Andrews cooldown at the end of the live show. Stay with us for that here today. We may have one more shot to get you in on the DawgNation invasion. One more chance to do that. So please reach out to us and be a part of that, and we'll see if we can get you on here. And speaking of getting you on, we got Terence Edwards here there as well. Terence, just kind of jump back in the conversation. What's your anticipation for this game there on Saturday? Is this a tough spot for Georgia, or is Georgia playing at such a level right now that it's almost impossible to create a tough spot for them here in this remaining moments of the regular season?
I think just like we spoke about last week, DA, when we just talked about what they have to play for, and I just spoke about they still have a lot to play for. And a lot last week was, winning the East. And they accomplished that even though that they had already won the East before they played. Just look how they play. I just think it's about pride. I was just speaking with a coworker this morning. I think one of the best things that I've seen out of this coaching staff is how they get 18 to 21-year-old young men to come out and play with the same hunger and fight and focus each week, knowing that most of the time they're the better team. They're picked to win. They've been ranked number one for how many consecutive weeks. They have a winning streak that's ongoing. It's hard getting young men up to play and stay focused, and they've done a great job. I think that just the coaching job of keep getting these young men to play with the same fire each week is a great example of a great coaching staff.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right about that, and I think that the motivation to just be better than the team you're playing on Saturday, that seems to work for Georgia almost as well as like the tangible result. Last week, as you mentioned, there was the chance to kind of own the East by winning that game on Saturday, and clearly there's some motivation there around that, but it's also you just don't want whatever team lines up across from you. You don't want to give them that moment to think they might be better than you or they got the best of you in that given moment. And it seems like on a week-to-week basis, that's kind of what motivates Georgia, that ability to just be better than whoever it is that you're playing and make sure they know, the other side knows, that you are the better team and individually you are the better player. It seems like Georgia feeds on that motivation a good bit.
I think so. I just think this, just the way that if you hear former players speaking to maybe recruits, and you always hear that if you don't love football, you don't need to come to Georgia. I just think he has a bunch of guys that just love football, and I think the coaching staff has done a great job of just institutionalizing the Georgia way, the culture at Georgia, the way Kirby wants his teams to play. And you see that fire every weekend. Like I said, it's hard. I've been there. It's hard just getting up week in and week out and playing at your best. And he's gotten the best out of these young men now for at least 3 straight years of just going and playing high-level championship football. And you got to give credit to the coaching staff, and you got to give credit to the young men going in and continue having that focus and fight and fire to be the best each week.
One more thing on this topic. The other thing, and you kind of touched on this a moment ago too, you can also make a case that while Georgia doesn't have like an SEC championship berth to play for anymore, and while there are more important games that Georgia will play later than when it's playing on Saturday, the truth is, given the national landscape right now, the fact that of the teams rated in the top 8 by the College Football Playoff Top 25, there's only a combined 2 losses from that group here right now. That in order to be in the College Football Playoff, you'd be well served by winning every game as much as you possibly can. The last 2 years, Georgia probably earned its way into the College Football Playoff before it even got to the SEC championship. We don't know if that's going to be a possibility this year, just given how deep the field seems to be at the moment. But it certainly doesn't hurt to continue to pile up wins and put pressure on the committee as the 2-time national champion to include the Dogs no matter what. So there is a roundabout way in that kind of overall mission to, as we say here, go for 3-23. The more you keep piling up wins, the more you're building your case and your candidacy for being in the College Football Playoff no matter what.
I think we have to be undefeated going into the SEC championship game to kind of lock and guarantee ourselves a spot in the top 4. So, Michigan still has to play Ohio State. So there's some games that's going to lead to some other teams losing. but we have to continue to stay unbeaten. I mean, I just think it'll be a shame if we go into one of these last two games and lose, then happen to lose against Alabama in the SEC championship game. I mean, we definitely won't be in. So there's a lot to play for, a lot of things that are riding on these last two games, and then the SEC championship game. I think these kids don't want to leave any doubt in anyone's mind who's the best program in America right now.
I want to talk to you about something you've obviously had some fun with on social media, and I do believe it's a topic that ought to be addressed here right now, and that's the emergence of Mike Bobo as kind of a fan favorite after what was obviously a good deal of criticism before the season began and some skepticism about Kirby Smart's decision to hire, Bobo as offensive coordinator. Well, my gosh, he's obviously answered that to a huge degree, just given the overall offensive success that George has enjoyed. You've clearly kind of had some fun with this. What do you make of kind of the way in which now Bobo is being reconsidered, and all of a sudden it seems like a lot of Georgia fans who were perhaps not quite so sure to begin with, and to the credit of a lot of Georgia fans, many of them have openly admitted this, of, hey, I wasn't too sure, but now I'm obviously thrilled. A lot of Georgia fans have been more than happy to acknowledge the about-face that their opinion has made, but what do you make of the way in which the reputation of Mike Bobo has really been bolstered based on the way the Georgia offense has performed here this year?
I just think, to me, and I'm not trying to change anyone's opinion, but just from my training, I never even thought this would be such a big deal. I think he's as the OC, has the highest scoring average in Georgia history 3 out of 4 years. So he's always been able to put up points. What I've always said is just the talent gap is a little different between his first stint in Athens and his second. I think, he had to win a few games in his first stint, 48, 40. Like, he had to score a lot of points to win the games. And I don't think now with the defense that he has, with the team that we have, you don't have to go out there and feel that you have to score or call the perfect play on every possession. If we do go 3-0 or we don't score and we punt, you're very confident that our defense is going to get you the ball back in a timely manner, that we're going to be able to score points at some point. So, with him and having the ability to be up under Coach Monken, I think they help each other out. I know for a fact that they help each other out. Bobo wasn't there last year just to be there. He actually helped with the game plans. He helped with the overall scheme of things. And I'm sure he learned a lot of things from Coach Monken, and he put it into his way of calling plays, and every play call is different. But I'm sure he learned things from Monken, and Monken learned things from him, and I think that's helped Bobo to even become a better OC. If you're not getting better at your job and staying the same, then you're gonna get stagnant. You're gonna get stale. So I just think Bobo has done a great job with up the middle runs and I formation toss sweeps and too many screen passes to average 40 points. So if he continued to run up the middle, we went back to old I formation, toss sweep for a score, and throwing screens, and we continue to average 40 points, then just sign me up for that type of offense.
Yeah, because, the thing that Kirby Smart pointed out this week is that part of what's made the performance of Bobo so impressive is the fact that for good portions of this year, you either didn't have Ladd McConkey, or then, for the Florida game, you didn't have Brock Bowers, that, he hasn't really, you didn't have the same version of Kendall Milton you saw on Saturday. I didn't have Amarius Mims, that Georgia's had to play without some pretty key components a lot, and yet the production for the most part was still there. And so now, Terrence, you start to think about, okay, well, the offense on Saturday, this was everybody fully healthy, and it was 50 whatever points against a top 52 points against a top 10 ranked team. And so not only has it been a very successful season for Bobo thus far, it is very easy to imagine that Georgia's about to, much like it did a year ago, kind of turn on its offensive firepower now that you're getting to the most important games here coming up, that perhaps the Ole Miss game was a little bit of a precursor to the best being yet to come for this Georgia offense, and kind of playing at that level for much of the rest of the season.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, you just hit on a great point that the full complement of his players he hasn't had throughout this whole season. We always had backups in. We had to mix and match on the O-line. Ladd hasn't been in, one of your best receivers. Brock missed a few games. Oscar came in and did a wonderful job. So he hasn't had the full complement of who you think is going to be there. And Kendall Milton is back probably close to 100%, and you saw his ability to just run the football up the middle, as a lot of fans would call it, and get those tough runs.
Yeah.
So you saw the complement of the full arsenal that we have to our ability to have, and just think about those players continue to stay healthy. And if he has this full complement, I'll take 50 points each week with these guys, and being able to score against anybody. So give him his full complement of players, and let's see what he can do.
All right, let me address one final topic with you here just for a moment. Obviously, it's Tennessee on the road on Saturday. I would say that's a big game. Tennessee still ranked in the top 20. Clean old-fashioned hay to close out the regular season. That game obviously matters to a lot of people. Big-time SEC championship, which I want to get to you with here in a moment. But just kind of give me your overall feeling about Georgia. Like, where do you think this team is right now in terms of what you'd perhaps like to see the next couple of regular season games, or how rounded into form do you believe that Georgia is as it goes into the stretch that's going to determine the way this season's remembered?
Yes, I mean, first and foremost, I think this is what everybody wants. We need to come out of these next two games healthy as it could be. We don't need anyone offensively or defensively coming out with any kind of nicks. Dumas is out for the foreseeable future, so we just need all our guns ready and loaded for the next three games, and then we'll have some time off from the bowl game. But the biggest thing I just want to see just the consistency of getting better each week. You don't want to go into the games and not trying to play your best because you've always already have locked up the East. I know Tennessee is one of the rivals, but we can't go into Georgia Tech knowing that we beat them so bad lately that they're not a formidable opponent. You got to respect each opponent, and I think that's what I would like to see, that our teams respect whoever we play and go out there and just play the Georgia brand of football that we've seen throughout these 3 or 4 years.
And listen, I do realize that the team itself can't do this, and obviously some fans want to kind of keep the focus right here on this particular week there as well. But for a brief moment, can we just look ahead for a brief moment? I think the Georgia-Alabama SEC championship game sets up to be one of the biggest conference title games, played here in Atlanta in years, right? Where the stakes seem like they're going to be really high. The whole narrative of how many more times is Nick Saban going to get a chance to do this, and can Alabama take back from Georgia what Georgia's enjoyed the last couple of years? Like, don't you get the impression? And I know, I don't want Georgia looking ahead, but I don't mind doing it with you for 60 seconds here. Don't you get the impression this Georgia SEC championship game against Alabama is just going to be an absolute behemoth by the time we get to it and by the time that game is played?
I think there's going to be a lot of headlines, talking points, and I think there's a few that will be there. I think the biggest one from the Georgia fans base is probably going to be my little brother, my good friend, Jermaine Burton.
Yeah.
And I think the second was going to be what David Pollard said to Nick Saban on a panel that Georgia has taken over college football. So I just think those two things have kind of really reignited this game, and those are going to probably be the two talking points. Has Georgia really taken over? He has an opportunity to show the world that we have. And then let's just call it, it's going to be that old-fashioned hate for Jermaine in that game. So it's going to be a lot of talking points, and we could talk about it. We're not playing in the game, so we can always look ahead. But those are going to be the talking points, of the two biggest talking points in that game, in my opinion.
Terrence, really good stuff. I appreciate it as always. Your insight's so valuable, and obviously, as we mentioned last week, season for a lot of teams, has come to an end, and obviously your team, Milton, and a lot of others continue to play on here. But eventually, we'll get to that winter time of year, and it'll be time to start doing that bubble work and training for the next season there as well. So, for people who want to contact the Terence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy, how can they do that?
Yes, the bubble work is going to get officially started in February. So, anyone looking to come and join the bubble work 2 days a week with quarterbacks and DBs. You can find me on social media at Terence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy.
Terrence, I appreciate your time. I love the conversation. We'll look forward to doing it again very soon.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I have made a promise to all of you that we're not going to go crazy on the Georgia-Alabama hype until the next 2 weeks are taken care of, because these two regular season games provide plenty of intrigue and interest on their own, and obviously Georgia's got the mission, the responsibility to win these games. But allow yourself to peek ahead for just that brief second. Like, do you realize how big that's going to be? I mean, it's going to be, as big as anything we've seen in quite some time, because, and we'll get more into this here in a moment, but by appearances right now, the stakes could be far higher. And that's one of the things I think is going to add to this, in addition to, former Dog Jermaine Burton playing for Alabama, the Kirby-Saban matchup, and how many more times we get a chance to see that. The belief, and this is the thing that's kind of like sort of sticks in my craw a little bit, the idea that what Georgia's enjoyed the last 2 years, they've simply just borrowed from Alabama, and that Alabama might want it back now, and the idea that Alabama gets it back just because it wants it. There's some of that that's out there right now, and so we're going to address all of that coming up in the weeks to come. But we're going to take care of the business at hand first prior to getting to all of that. Speaking of business to take care of, how about cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean? That's business that we love. And the thing that I'm so excited about is because, and speaking of trying not to look too far ahead, you get through this season, you finish off the mission, go for 3-23. At that point in time, it's time for me to start thinking about January of 2024 and being on board Icon of the Seas, largest cruise ship ever constructed. I mean, it's a marvel. It's a work of art, and it's going to be a wonderful experience, and I'm excited about it. But I also want my purpose for going. You got to understand this. I am simply going on this so I can come back and tell all of you about it, because really it's your own experience that I want to be sensational and wonderful, and that's why I'm going to kind of come back and share the good word about how much fun all of this is going to be. And then when you hear me talk about it, you can go ahead and make your plans to be on Icon of the Seas yourself. But you don't have to wait for me to go. You can start to make plans for this right now, because I can promise you the limited space that's available for these early sailings on Icon of the Seas, it is being booked up fast. That's why you want to reach out to Jessica Slater and let her help you out right away. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Or you can email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Once again, that's jslater@dreamvacations.com. Let her tell you about the DawgNation cruise coming up in April, but also the debut of Icon of the Seas, largest cruise ship ever constructed, getting ready to set sail. Going to be a wonderful time. So, one of the things as we go cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean, I deeply, sincerely love coaching rumors. I love this time of year. I've said this a million times. I like the kind of, this coach may go here, and this coach may get hired here, and whatever else. I just am into all that. And because for those of us who love college football, in our mind, we can always construct scenarios that we think make sense, and sometimes those things match reality, and sometimes they don't. The other day, for instance on this, you may have heard me say, I tell you what I think makes sense. Dan Mullen ought to just go back to Mississippi State. Now, at the beginning of the show, or near the beginning of the show, we made fun of Dan Mullen because that's what we do. But in this particular case, I'm actually not making fun of Dan Mullen. This is my attempt to be as objective as I possibly can be. I do think if Mullen wants to coach again, coaching at a place in which he's already had some degree of success, and by typical Mississippi State standards, Dan Mullen was their Bear Bryant. I mean, that's as successful as anyone's ever going to be in Starkville. It is objectively true that Mullen does not love the recruiting process. At a place like Mississippi State, you're not winning a lot of four-star battles necessarily anyway. That is a place in which you sort of have to coach guys up more so than go out and beat the bushes for recruits. So we were not kidding when we said it's not a report, this is not inside information, just sort of a thought. It might make sense if Mullen wants to coach again for him to go back to Mississippi State. The one question had been, does Mullen really want to coach again? My understanding is living there at his home around Lake Oconee, really enjoying all of that, spending time with his kids. And for some people, after making millions of dollars, that might be about all you need. So it's not obvious that Mullen necessarily wants to coach again. At least it wasn't. But now we have reason to believe that perhaps maybe he does. He had a very interesting quote on with his ESPN here this week. And keep in mind, Mullen has gotten pretty good positive reviews for his TV work, meaning that he's effective enough as a communicator to succeed on television. That means that when he speaks, it's probably not a misspeak. It's probably not a, taken out of context thing, because Mullen has proved himself to be a pretty effective communicator. So this is what Dan Mullen said this week. about the possibility of the Mississippi State coaching opening, and you tell me if this rings in your ears the same way that it rings in mine. Mullen says, as I would say, you never say never when it comes to those things that go on. I haven't spoken to anyone administratively at Mississippi State. I've talked to all kinds of fans and friends and people that we love in Mississippi. As you see all over the place, you never say never about going back. But I don't know if this is the time. That sounds like a guy who wants the job, does it not? And if you're Mississippi State, I mean, you're in a bad spot, right? You have one-and-done coach in Zach Arnett, the untimely, tragic passing of Mike Leach the year before. You need as stabilizing a mechanism as you can possibly get. What's about to be a brand new landscape in the SEC, a coach that you already know can be successful at your spot. To me, that just sort of seems like it makes some sense. Now you say, well, is Mullen a better coach than other coaches that Mississippi State could hire? I mean, a lot of that's difficult to determine. Now, I'll also add this too. There was the thing earlier this week. Y'all got to be careful with stuff like this. The fake tweet involving Jamie Chadwell, who's the Liberty coach, and he was like firing up his Liberty team, but the location on the tweet said Starkville, Mississippi. Y'all, that's a fake tweet. Y'all got to be careful. This is not only are we in coaching rumor season, we're also in fake tweet season, and there are going to be a lot of fake tweets out there, so trying to get drawn off sides by that. So, in other words, Chadwell may be a candidate for this job, but he was not in Starkville, Mississippi this week. You may have seen that. I don't even think Twitter puts the location of tweets on anymore. That's kind of a change I guess Elon has made. But the point is, a lot of fake tweets out there. Chadwell may be a candidate for this job. Is Mullen better than Chadwell? I do think that Chadwell's doing a good job at Liberty here right now, but Mullen's already been successful at Mississippi State before. Either way, kind of interesting to hear from the quote from Mullen on ESPN that makes it sound like under the right circumstances, he might be willing to come back. That's kind of interesting. Let me do one more story here for a moment. So, to me, the narrative through line of this season thus far, and part of this includes Georgia, but also this is kind of around Georgia there as well. The narrative through line of this particular season is how few of the top teams have lost. You've got top 8 right now from Alabama up to Georgia. There's only 2 combined losses of those 8 teams. We have a very realistic possibility of having an undefeated ACC champ, an undefeated SEC champ, an undefeated Big Ten champ, an undefeated Pac-12 champ. There's a very strong possibility that the 4 playoff teams are just undefeated Power 5 conference champions, something that is obviously a pretty big rarity. And then below that, you've got a potential of a team like Texas, very big brand, one at Alabama. They could be a 12-1 Big 12 champ. If Alabama were to beat Georgia, all of a sudden, that's clearly a team with a pretty big resume there at that point. The crop at the top just seems really, really deep right now because, to use a kind of a gambling phrase, the idea of the favorite team being chalk has just prevailed here thus far. The chalk, the teams that are ranked up near the top, the expected winners have continued to win at a rate the likes of which we haven't seen in college football. But the one thing we know is college football does have a way of surprising us. So the question we ask ourselves is college football going to have a big surprise for us in store at some point in time before this season is done? Is there a chance that chaos just sort of blows through here the next couple of weeks, and all of a sudden all of these would-be Power 5 undefeated conference champions, all of a sudden we don't have nearly as many of them? I told you yesterday, I'm going to reiterate this right now. When you look at the possibility of chaos and the possibility of something happening that kind of changes the landscape, there are 2 teams right now that matter, and neither of these 2 teams are ranked in the top 8. I'm looking at Louisville, who comes in at number 10 this week, and I'm looking at Oregon State, who comes in at number 11. Oregon State especially, because Oregon State the next 2 weeks takes on Washington this week, and they're actually a favorite in that game at home, and they have Civil War against Oregon the following week. Oregon State could introduce chaos into the story in a way that it hasn't existed before, because Oregon State, as kind of the ultimate, middle finger to the rest of the departing Pac-12 teams, could eliminate the current Pac-12 from the playoff race by beating rivals Washington and Oregon over the course of the next 2 weeks. Keep your eye on the Beavers here this particular weekend. The other team I feel strongly about on that's Louisville. Now, Louisville's only got 1 loss in its own right. They play Miami this week. They've got their in-state rival Kentucky the week after that. And then there's a very strong possibility that it's Louisville, Florida State in the ACC title game. Florida State trying to be unbeaten. They've been in the top 4. They seem to have a fairly unobstructed path to the playoff. But Louisville wants to change that. Keep your eye on that. Other than that, for this weekend, you don't expect the 2 Big Ten teams, Ohio State and Michigan, to have too much trouble. That's Minnesota, Maryland, respectively, there on that. Oregon, they've got Arizona State this week. Arizona State's been a tough team to figure out, kind of up and down here a little bit. Maybe you keep your eye on Oregon just a bit. Obviously, Georgia's on the road against a ranked opponent. I guess you got to take that seriously a little bit, too. The other team to mention here is Texas against Iowa State. The thought here is, Texas has been kind of hanging by a string here as of late, winning some of these games a little closer than it's supposed to be. On the road against Iowa State, they're just barely above a touchdown favorite in that spot. The truth is I've been pretty pro-Texas here this season because even in the the wake of lost quarterback, Quinn Ewers has been injured away from the field here for a few weeks. Texas has still found a way to keep winning. Now they have a star running back who's also been injured too. That creates even more of a challenge. But Texas, on the heels of getting the big signature win at Alabama, has kind of found a way to win week after week after week since then. To me, that's the Longhorns doing their job, and we'll see if they're also able to kind of avoid chaos by going on the road and winning again and preserving that playoff spot for them. Could be a fun debate, could be a fun discussion. It could be the kind of situation where, to bring it back to Georgia, Georgia itself needs to keep winning each week because the teams around them are kind of doing the same. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And before we get back to the Georgia Bulldogs and our conversation about them and some cool stuff from Brock Bowers, let me also give a shout out to our friends at Mr. Electric, DawgNation's choice for residential and commercial electrical needs. They've been in business for nearly 30 years, and they offer repair work, installations, lighting work, and, of course, electrical safety, because let's be honest with you, safety is very important when it comes to any kind of stuff around your house related to electricity. Plus, they've also got a team of licensed experts, insured electricians, and upfront flat rate pricing. So if you need 24-hour emergency service or if you just need a quote on some work you've been looking to get done, Mr. Electric's got you covered on all of that. It's a neighborly company, and they're right here around your neighborhood there as well. MrElectricAtlanta.com is the website. That's right. Visit MrElectricAtlanta.com for a lot more on that today. All right, the big story going back to this past Saturday, it was Brock Bowers' return. Amazing in that Bowers seemed to recover from this tightrope ankle injury as quickly as anyone perhaps ever has, at least right there at the front end of what we've seen anybody do before. And Bowers talked this week about his decision to do that. And I think when you listen to Brock here, one of the things that you're going to get is it's not just a statement about who Brock Bowers is, but I believe it's a statement about the team around Brock, the fact that he was this motivated not just to come back for his own sake, but to come back for the sake of those who also share this locker room with him at Georgia. This is Brock talking about that a little earlier this week. Take a listen to that.
What goes through your head, as you get some of those calls and such?
I just kind of, it never really crossed my mind. I just wanted to always come back and for the team and all the guys in the locker room. We all care so much about each other, and I just wanted to come back and try to help the team win.
I think one of the things that we spend some time wrestling with and discussing around here is, is Georgia going to do this again? Obviously, right there in the front of the desk, we have go for 3 and 23. It's something we believe in. It's our prediction. But it's also a monumental task. And when you look at a season in which Georgia remains undefeated and kind of winning week to week, what you're looking for are those hints, those clues dropped along the way. This really can be the kind of special team capable of doing something unprecedented, winning a third straight national championship. I don't want you to miss this as a possible very important data point in all of that. And I don't just mean because Brock Bowers, the sensational player, is returning. I'm telling you right now, this is about more than just Bowers, because you heard Brock say this. The guys in this locker room are special. I wanted to come back for them. Brock Bowers obviously wants to demonstrate how good he is and sort of thwart all the naysayers who suggested he shouldn't come back. Kirby Smart addressed that on Saturday night. But Bowers says his reason for doing so was not so he could demonstrate his own greatness and demonstrate his own toughness and further move himself up the draft board. He says, I like this locker room. I like this team. I want to come back to play with this team some more. I think potentially, y'all, that's a pretty important data point because the guys closest to the action, they just know. There are secrets contained within a locker room that we can never be aware of. I know everybody sort of knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and everybody sort of got the inside scoop when it comes to Georgia football. But there is still some knowledge contained in the inner sanctum of this team that can never be fully understood by people who are not in the room. And Brock Bowers is obviously in the room. And what Bowers says is, I like these guys. I like the feeling that we have playing together. And I want as much of that as I can possibly get. To me, that stands as a pretty big hint that this team can be special. It's obviously not a guarantee of anything, of course. But Bowers is not coming back to a team that he thinks is unworthy of his effort and unworthy of his dedication. And the fact that Bowers, who is as hungry to compete as he is, believes this is a team that wants to compete just as hard as he does, boy, that tells you a lot about what Georgia can be before this season's done. I wanted to make sure we closed out our show by mentioning that here today. Also, one more thing to give you here. A lot of fun stuff coming with our friends at Cartersville in the days ahead. How about the Gun Show of the South coming up November 18th and 19th? And you can look for a fun new restaurant to celebrate the holiday season. How about Largo's in downtown Cartersville there as well? So a lot of great stuff going on in the Cartersville area here. And Largo's also getting you ready for some family-style Thanksgiving meals for a really, really fun opportunity for Thanksgiving here coming up. So some great stuff going on with the folks up there in Cartersville. So make sure you go to the website. Visit cartersvillega.org for more on that. That's visit cartersvillega.org for a lot more on that today. So yesterday, we were not able to bring you a great collection of golden shoes because we had a little bit of an issue, which we don't want to talk too much about, but it did happen. The point is, so today we're going to make up for what we didn't do yesterday, and then tomorrow try to have a big old Friday shoes dump of all the stuff that we planned on doing today, and just make sure we give full credit to everybody who sent some great stuff to us here over the course of the last few days. Now, let's give you our first golden shoe for today. We've got some great ones, and this is one of the best we've gotten in a long time. Real Pop 75 sends this incredible rendition here. He says, which of these will best represent DawgNation invasion on the Tennessee River? And you've got a couple of great examples of Georgia fans all over one of these boats, one of these barges, the Georgia flags, the replica there of UGA, fans all over the place. Real Pop 75, back-to-back Natty champs on Twitter. What an amazing thing this is. One of the most deserving golden shoes we've had in quite some time. You love to see that. And what an exciting thing to do to get ready for DawgNation invasion on the Tennessee River coming up on Saturday. Really good stuff. How about our next one also as well? Clint Haynes writes in, one of the jokes as of late has been the idea of turning the Tennessee River red. Clint says, BA is going to paint that much larger Hillbilly River red this weekend. Hashtag go dogs. Hashtag go for 3 and 23. He's also got the Dogs winning 41-13 there on Saturday. So, Clint, we love that, and we love the idea of taking over that Tennessee River and, at least figuratively speaking, painting it red. Good stuff from Clint there on that. And then, finally, another golden shoe to give out here. Our buddy UGA Nation 412 is always giving us some great stuff, sharing this from our friends over at 960 The Ref earlier this week. He writes in, I woke up this morning and a close friend of mine from West Virginia, who's also a big dog fan, tagged me in this on Facebook, and I needed to share it with you. This is truly great stuff. And it's 960 The Ref showing a cool picture of Kamari Laster saying, the Earth's surface is roughly 71% water, and the rest is covered by Kamari Laster. Really fun stuff there on that, 960 The Ref. And then also a UGA Nation 412 who shared all of that. Great golden shoes today, and they may be a day late, but nonetheless, we get them on the screen here today, which I'm always happy to do. A lot more golden shoes coming tomorrow there, too. But before we wrap up things today, let's give you our Gator Hater Updater. Lousy, stinking Gators crying big crocodile tears after Nasir Johnson's flip to UGA, and more pain coming here when they realize it's been 1,104 days since they have beaten Georgia. That is good news to close out our show. We'll see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cooldown. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That is what R.S. Andrews is all about. All right, so I am going to do this. And, Michael, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to help me with a lower third here to kind of help people out on this. So our friend Dari Payro heard this week, Dari from R.S. Andrews, of course, he heard this week that the wait list had once again been shut down, that we opened it up briefly, got a flood of folks coming in there on that, had to shut that down. DawgNation Invasion has been sold out for months on the Tennessee River, been sold out for months. But one of our great sponsors for the DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River is R.S. Andrews. And so R.S. Andrews, as you would expect a sponsor to have, they've had kind of a collection of tickets. And so what Dari has decided to do, and this is incredibly nice, right? He's eating the cost on this, and he's doing all that. Dari is going to dedicate some of his tickets to get a couple of more folks on the DawgNation Invasion. And I wanted to offer that up to you all here right now. And we're going to do this in sort of contest fashion. And this is the thing, Michael, if we can put this on the screen, I would appreciate an email address, info@DawgNation.com, info@DawgNation.com. If we're able to put that email address on the screen if possible, I know this is kind of like on the fly here, and I apologize for that. Just simply email info@DawgNation.com. Thank you very much. By the way, we've still got the R.S. Andrews graphic up there as well, so it all works out really, really, really smoothly. So info@DawgNation.com. Simply give us your name and give us your contact information. We're going to take all the submissions that we get. We're going to print those off, and we are going to draw 2 winners at random. And each winner is going to get a pair of tickets for the DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River on Saturday to the tailgate, not the game. The game's something different. If you want to go to the game, you're on your own for that. But we're going to give away 2 pairs of tickets to the DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River. This is from the personal stash of Dari Payro there from R.S. Andrews, offering this to those one more shot to kind of get on the boat, one more shot to be a part of the DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River. So we're going to give this a little bit of time to let folks kind of get in on this, and then we're going to draw out 2 winners at random, and each winner gets a pair of tickets to the DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River on Saturday. So go to info@DawgNation.com. That's an email address. Name, contact information. We're going to print all those off, put them in a big pile. I have no say in this. That's like the one thing behind the scenes I'm always very clear on is I'm more than happy to announce winners, but I don't want to be in the process of drawing winners because just my weird brain kind of works that way. But we do want there to be winners, and I'll be looking forward to announcing those here tomorrow. So that is good stuff. All right, let us now get your comments via our First and 15. And today, I'm very thankful to say that the stream has kind of held on, which unfortunately these days is not always a guarantee. But it was today, so that's good. All right. Oh, by the way, there's Dolly Parton. I don't know if we can put Dolly in the screen here. First of all, I am generally speaking pro Dolly. It's kind of weird to have to sort of treat her as the enemy for this particular week, just given the fact that she is there. It's been a little bit of a topic of conversation. I don't know what she's doing. Do we know what she's doing? I think that Dolly just had a new rock album came out. I'm not being funny. I think she had a rock album come out. Yeah, and she's also been tweeting about the game. And she's 90, is that right? 80s at least, right? She's got to be in the 80s at least. Really amazing. Seems to still be in great health. So we're anti-Dolly this week, but sort of pro-Dolly in general. And I also sort of feel that way about Dollywood as well. Cody Chaffins, who's producing with us here today, said that instead of I'm going to Disney World after the Super Bowl, that Georgia should say I'm going to Dollywood after the game on Saturday. Dollywood's only about 45 minutes from Neyland, so you could definitely do that. Let's see what else. Oh, yeah, so Georgia's got Quavo. And so that's Georgia's top celebrity fan. Now, admittedly, I'm not the biggest hip hop, expert. So I don't know Quavo's catalog quite as well. I probably know more Dolly Parton songs than I know Quavo songs. But the one thing you do love about Quavo, even as someone like me who just does not know a ton about hip hop and won't pretend to do it because I'd look like a fool if I tried to, Quavo is legitimately a fan. And he's also kind of a big fan of Atlanta sports there as well. There are a lot of sort of the celebrity fans that seem to like being fans more than they like the idea of actually doing, the idea of being a fan is more entrenched in them than the actual fandom itself. But Quavo, I think, the best I can tell, he genuinely loves sports and loves Georgia football and a true hardcore fan. And it feels like he sort of gets to know a good bit of the players very well. And it seems like, he's a really true legitimate fan. My guess is Dolly Parton, wouldn't know Josh Heupel from Hank Hill. My guess is, of course, I guess a lot of people have a hard time sort of picking them apart. But the point is at least Quavo, Georgia's sort of famous, musically inclined celebrity fan, at least he's a real fan. Yeah, 225 girl says Quavo and Pastor Troy are definitely Georgia fans there for sure. Also, what's his name? Is Bubba Sparks? Is he a Georgia fan? I know he was on yeah, I think so. I think he's a Georgia fan. There's a lot of country singers. Like Luke Bryan's a massive Georgia fan. Like Luke Bryan, on like American Idol and stuff like that, shouts out Georgia all the time. And now Tennessee's also got a lot of like legitimate country music, fans there as well. Morgan Wallen's a big Tennessee fan, for instance. There's a good number of those. Cassie Turner says that Luke Bryan creeps her out. See, here's the thing: is like at this stage of my life, I'm sort of anti-cool. And I know that a lot of people obviously view what they kind of view what we call bro country as very uncool. Like, I listen to a lot of bro country. I do. And I know it's not cool. I don't really care about being cool. I listen to a lot of what young, hip people like Cassie would think of as bro country. I do probably listen to a good bit of bro country. Let's see what else. James Richard says Tennessee's got Dolly Parton on the sideline, and Georgia's going to have a big string of ex-play or some ex-dogs, which is certainly something that's worked out pretty well for them. Cassie says she still listens to Luke Bryan. And like Luke Bryan is a guy, he's also like a legitimately big fan. Also, Luke Bryan was, and now we get dinged for stuff all the time, and I don't really even care, but Luke Bryan also got us dinged on YouTube one time because we played like the clip of him making fun of Florida on American Idol, and they have this like software. It's amazing. They find this stuff just like that. And I mean, I felt like it's like 10 seconds long. It's well within fair use, I think. But we got dinged. It's like, oh my gosh, we're in trouble. Now we just get dinged for stuff all the time. Listen, Lesko says he thought I'd be a big Owl City fan. No, I'm not listening to that kind of stuff. Let's see what else. By the way, you ever seen, speaking of Dolly Parton, her former love interest was Burt Reynolds, right? No, that was Lonnie Anderson. Never mind. I got confused. I got Lonnie Anderson and Dolly Parton confused for a moment. But do you remember like old cool pictures you'd see of like Burt Reynolds hanging around Georgia practice and like kind of those old days? There's some great like old photos of celebrity fame. I think like Jim Neighbors, I think weirdly enough, was kind of one of them one time, which is kind of a different story in its own right. But just kind of a really cool picture of like old celebrities hanging around Georgia practice back in the Dooley era. James Brown, of course. I'd love to just go back and get as many of those pictures as possibly. BA's Ty Stone Cold Style mentioning Jeff Foxworthy. He says he should do some Dolly jokes on the Tennessee. Yeah, that's pretty good. John, I said Hank Hill earlier. It's Bobby Hill is the one that Heupel looks like, because Jonathan says we've beaten Blackbeard, Sling Blade, and now it's time to beat Bobby Hill. I like that, Jonathan Aaron. I like that a lot. Darian Ford says, I had a dream last night. We were back in Sanford Stadium celebrating a three-peat. I love the thought of that. Now, I'll tell you, so 2 years ago, last home game, in the press box, I always sit next to another reporter. Does not work for our, site, but we've sat next to each other for years. In fact, like 90% of the conversation we've ever had with each other are like sitting in this spot. We just happen to sit by each other. And so one of the things that he said was, and I always remember this because I remember what a big idea this felt like at the time. He said, I guess there's a chance we're all back here again in January for a trophy celebration. And that was kind of the first that I really considered of that. And obviously now we've done that 2 years in a row. We've all descended back on Athens for the parade and everything like that. But I remember the time thinking, gosh, could this really happen? 2021 season, of course. Could this really happen? Could we actually all come to Sanford Stadium for not a football game, but for a celebration of a collection of football games in the championship season? And obviously now that's happened. And now you sort of almost, I hate to say expect to do it, but obviously you believe the chances of you doing that may be greater than not. But boy, when that was first introduced to me a couple of years ago, always stood as just an incredible idea, and it's obviously come true. John McAleer also pointing out that Jason Aldean's a Georgia fan there as well. That is the case. All right, we got one more here. Yeah, so now listen, I'm done. I'm so done with Ric Flair, and y'all, that is, you have no idea how painful that is for me to say. I am so done with Ric Flair. First of all, it's not even the Michigan thing. Like, if Jim Harbaugh shows Flair more attention, he wants to be a Michigan fan, that's fine. But at this point in time, Flair's been a fan of every team in sports. For everything that y'all want to say about Drake, the hip-hop artist who's, supposedly, a little bit of a fan wanderer, Flair, for my generation, is even worse. Flair has been a fan of everybody. And now he's, like, super into Michigan, which is kind of gross. But, like, Flair's, like, one of my all-time, like, idols. Like, that big, like, that one picture of, like, Herschel and Flair together, like, that's like my entire childhood in one picture right there. Of Herschel and Flair and all that kind of stuff. So done with Ric Flair. So done with Ric Flair. Darian Ford says, I love wrestling, Texas A&M, and Dr. Pepper. That'll be my memoir right there. Wrestling, Texas A&M, and Dr. Pepper. That'll be my memoir. Cassie Turner says Aaron Rodgers is supporting UGA. Is that true? I didn't know that. Is that true? I had no idea of that. Roosevelt Grimes says we need Bill Goldberg music before every game. I actually don't hate that as an idea. That if you wanted to do something to kind of spice up the pregame intro, I think the big, like, orchestral Goldberg music from WCW, that's not a bad idea at all. And, Goldberg's son's a recruit now. I don't know what level of recruit, maybe the greatest of all time. I don't know. But that's not a bad idea. 225 Girl says Flair was a Panthers fan, then he switched to the Falcons. 225, he's been 49ers. I guess that was also related to Jim Harbaugh. Like, he's done the woo thing for every team in the NFL. Every team in the NFL. New Orleans, what do you call it? The Pelicans, he's been everything. Everything. James Richards says, my buddy's dad was roommates with Jim Neighbors first 2 years at Bama. That's interesting. Jim Neighbors also had a lot of roommates, I believe. But that's interesting. B.A. Stone Cold also mentioning the Stone Cold music. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I was mad when Austin Riley stopped using that. Like, almost mad enough that I want to try to find out why he did. Ultimately, my laziness won out over my curiosity, and I just let it go. But, Riley at some point in time this year sort of stopped using the Stone Cold music, and I wish he wouldn't have. So Aaron Rodgers, according to Cassie Turner, this is why I like having Cassie around. I wish some of y'all were as effective contributors as Cassie is. She says that Aaron Rodgers declared his support on the McAfee show when they were in Athens. Well, there you go. So you got Jonathan Aaron also said that Goldberg's son's going to be a walk-on at Bama. Well, there you go. Well, I still think it's a good idea to use the music. I don't hate that idea at all. Let's see what else. Philip Jordan Wells checking in over here. Making fun of me singing a version of Rhinestone Cowboy, like a red and black Rhinestone Cowboy. Yeah, there you go. There you go. All right, let me pop over to DawgNation.com for a minute and see what they're doing over here. Let's see what else. Ken Holcomb says that Ric Flair's endorsements are as fake as his wrestling. Yeah, I think that's probably the case. Let's see what else. Richard D says, speaking of wrestling, that Randy from Tifton on the postgame show gives the WWE feel. I'm telling you, I don't even know if Randy even likes professional wrestling, but when he does these postgame show call-ins or when he shows up live at the bookstore, it is a wrestling promo. He's very good at it. He's very good at the wrestling promo style deal there. Very, very good at that. Johnny Surf Dog says 27 in a row, all hail King Kirby. Yeah, so there's a lot of like stats floating around right now, and My problem is I'm not super detail oriented, so I'm only like vaguely aware of some of this kind of stuff. Like somebody mentioned the other day, Georgia on Saturday can go 8-0 3 years in a row in the SEC. That's crazy. And am I correct in saying that's never happened before? Is that right? Somebody knows this better than I do. 8-0 3 years in a row, never happened before. They can do that on Saturday. Mike mentioned this yesterday. Some of y'all know this stat too, that by winning a 28th in a row, that's like tying for what? Something? There's a streak out there alive for that. I should probably read the game notes, but there's some stuff out there that's pretty big there on that. Randy Hall says, what's my predicted score? I haven't quite gotten to it yet. I'm thinking about something along the lines of like, I mean, I told you, I do think this game could be a little closer. I'm thinking about something along the lines of like, say, 28-20, maybe something like that, 30-21. How about that? Let's do that. Let's do 30-21. And I'm not trying to be a troll by saying that because I told you during the regular show that the actual numbers don't back up the point that I'm making. So there's a chance that my hunch on this is completely wrong. If it is, obviously I'd be the happiest person in the world. But my hunch is single-digit victory for Georgia. And maybe that – I think the larger takeaway for me is if that's what it is, that's kind of all Georgia needs for it to be. You don't really need much more than that necessarily right now. So I've kind of got Georgia in that sort of 30-21 range here right now. Let me go to a Facebook for a moment there too. On Facebook. Then after that, we got to go, y'all. On Facebook. David Hoke says we should sneak some drones into Neyland Stadium at 2 a.m. on Saturday to paint the checker. I'm telling you. Here's the thing. If you go, and David's obviously just joking, but here's the thing you got to be aware of. If you go mess around with drones and doing stuff you're not supposed to, that's like a federal offense, okay? Because FAA governs drone use. So you got to be careful with some of that kind of stuff. But I know David's just joking, but it is kind of funny how quickly it is to kind of get yourself in some trouble with some of this kind of stuff. Bill Sanders says it's going to be like last week. He's thinking 52-17 again. Very funny line from David Hogue, though. Good idea. Very funny idea. All right, so Joel Moody says that by winning 28 in a row, that Georgia could tie, or Kirby Smart could tie Bear Bryant and Gene Stallings' all-time consecutive win record. That's very impressive. Very impressive. Very impressive. Tennille Calvino, good to have you in here. Let's see what else. Wayne Kirkland says Georgia's going to beat Tennessee and Tech with ease. The SEC championship will be a heavyweight battle with only one making the college football playoffs. So strong takes there from Wayne. Appreciate you weighing in. Ryan Walker talking about James Brown being a huge Georgia fan. I mean, there's some great stuff out there involving James Brown and Georgia, some really good stuff, and obviously the famous Dooley's Junkyard Dog song. Dustin Worley said, and this is why the games like this matter for so many of y'all, and I do get it. He says, I've got a $100 bet that I made with a friend in our subdivision. He says, LOL, we can't lose or I'll never hear the end of it. Yeah, I have so much respect for some of y'all who kind of live around folks like that. Totally get what a big deal that is. So, Dustin, for your sake, and for all of our sake, but your sake in particular, hope it's a good day for Georgia on Saturday. Riley Morris says, Arn Anderson grew up in Rome. My mama used to whoop him when they were little. Ha, go Dogs. Yeah, that's really cool. So, Arn Anderson also is like a legitimate Georgia fan and a great talker, right? I'd love to have Arn Anderson on the show. Love to do that. Cherie Byra says, as far as Bobo goes, the best revenge is success. And Cherie, you're obviously right about that. It's good to hear from you today. Obviously right about that. And clearly Mike Bobo is getting the last laugh over a lot of folks here right now. And by the way, speaking of some golf, we mentioned that earlier. You've got the fall wraparound tour event taking place down at Sea Island here this week. So good stuff there. Bill Sanders reminding us of that. Always a lot of fun. Good to have the folks in Georgia there in the Golden Isles for that. All right, one more quick trip around the comments. We're going to go. some of y'all listen very carefully and very closely. Some of you hear certain things that I sort of drop in there from time to time. Glad to know that some people pick up on that. It's one of those things, sometimes you sort of, if you know type of deal. Taylor Russell says the coolest celebrity musician tie into Georgia is REM, a band that literally created while they were in Athens. Yeah, obviously a great Athens music scene going back a long time there, for sure. Back at DawgNation.com again for a minute. Rambo says, I remember James Brown doing the halftime show to Georgia game wearing black leather pants and vest. It was about 95 degrees. Yeah, I've seen like some of like the photos of that. Like, I just think, I mean, the state of Georgia, kind of like late 70s, early 80s, just had to be like a really cool place to be. It always comes across that way. And those photos are always fascinating to me. Senior Dog 54 says, I got James Brown's autograph at a gas station in Madison about 20 years ago. That's really cool, Senior Dog. Really cool. Really cool. Kent Holcomb says, I wish that the UGA had a wrestling team. There's a lot of good talent in the state that has to go elsewhere. Yeah, unfortunately, a few years ago, like Georgia State had wrestling. They had to get rid of it. One of the casualties of Title IX, and I am not here to talk about that, but one of the casualties of Title IX is a lot of colleges had to give up their wrestling teams. Very, very sad to kind of come into Title IX compliance. So, a lot of athletes who are using wrestling as a way to pay for college, they just lost their scholarship. Like I said, that's not my place to talk about that here on the show, but it is something that happened. And Georgia State had a wrestling team and lost it. Obviously, wrestling remains a very big deal in kind of like the Big Ten world, Iowa, places like that. Iowa State, obviously good at wrestling too. But yeah, not a ton of that down here. All right, we got to go for now. Good stuff. You got to check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. We'll see Dari for Go With The Flow, presented by RS Andrews tomorrow. We'll see him, Dog Nation Invasion on the Tennessee River on Saturday. And one more time, if you want to try to get involved with that, have your chance to win a pair of tickets, info@DawgNation.com. And we'll draw a couple of winners at random there on that. Make sure you check out RS Andrews online at rsandrews.com. If you want to get your heating system tuned back up to get ready for the cold winter that's going to be here, stay warm and toasty this holiday season with a freshly tuned up heating system from our friends at RS Andrews. You'll have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Dog Nation Daily, presented by Meriwether and Tharp. We'll look forward to talking to you then.